Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series on the life divine with our beloved Ranga. We continue chapter 20, Death, Desire, and Incapacity, and we're about four long paragraphs in. We begin today with the paragraph, "But though life is power, and the growth of individual life," etc.
That's right. The page is 203 in the CWSA. So we read the para first. But though life is power and the growth of individual life means the growth of the individual power, still the mere fact of its being a divided, individualized life and force prevents it from really becoming master of its world. For that would mean to be master of the all force. And it is impossible for a divided and individualized consciousness with a divided, individualized, and therefore limited power and will to be master of the all force. Only the all will can be that, and the individual only, if at all, by becoming again one with the all will and therefore with the all force. Otherwise, the individual life in the individual form must be always subject to the three badges of its limitation: death, desire, incapacity. So, if life cannot become infinite and that universal force, if you are stuck in that individual form, you can never be master of the universe, and you will always be subject to death, desire, incapacity. But if you can become the all will and the all force, death will not exist for you, because your soul, you will realize you are not body, mind, life, you are soul and you are immortal. And desire disappears because you own the whole. When you own the whole, you don't need any desire. And incapacity, because you become all force. So incapacity disappears, it becomes full. So that's what Srimad is saying. But so long as you are stuck in the individual form, these three things are, he is calling them the three badges of its limitation. Death, desire, incapacity.
Strong word, badges.
Yeah. The marks. So, language was pretty easy.
Yes, pretty good.
So, we go to the next one. Now, one by one, he will take up. He will explain death, he will explain desire, and he will explain incapacity. And actually, although we see them as negative forms, they are really processes and diminished forms of their ideal form. Death is a process of life. Desire is a process. It is the wanting to get back to what you have lost. And you have, what have you lost? You have lost the all force, you have lost the all consciousness, you have lost the all ananda. And because of that, you are desiring here. But you are desiring in the wrong way. And incapacity also he will explain in a very interesting way. So first he takes up death. Death is imposed on the individual life both by the conditions of its own existence and by its relations to the all force which manifests itself in the universe. For the individual life is a particular play of energy specialized to constitute, maintain, energize, and finally to dissolve. When its utility is over, one of the myriad forms which all serve, each in its own place, time and scope, the whole play of the universe. The energy of life in the body has to support the attack of the energies external to it in the universe. It has to draw them in and feed upon them, and is itself being constantly devoured by them. All matter, according to the Upanishad, is food. And this is the formula of the material world, that the eater eating is himself eaten. The life organized in the body is constantly exposed to the possibility of being broken up by the attack of the life external to it, or its devouring capacity being insufficient or not properly served, or there being no right balance between the capacity of devouring and the capacity or necessity of providing food for the life outside. It is unable to protect itself and is devoured, or is unable to renew itself and therefore wasted away or broken. It has to go through the process of death for a new construction or renewal. So, there are quite a few things here. Let's look at it a little carefully. It will be interesting. So, death is imposed on the individual life both by the conditions of its own existence and by its relations to the all force which manifests itself in the universe. So first of all, he is saying there are two things that determine, death is determined by two things: its own existence and its relation with the universe. The own existence, because it is limited, so death comes in, he will explain why. And the relation with the universe also has got different forms, and they are always, yesterday we read, there's always an interchange. You are exchanging even physically you are exchanging stuff with the physical universe, vitally you are exchanging, they are also impinging on you, thoughts also are coming in and going out. There is a constant traffic between the two. So these attacks, sometimes if they are too much for you, then that's what he is going to describe. Either you devour them or they devour you. So it depends on how much strength you have. So we read the next sentence. For the individual life is a particular play of energy specialized to constitute, maintain, energize, and finally to dissolve, when its utility is over, one of the myriad forms which all serve in its own place, time and scope, the whole play of the universe. Life is creating different forms, and each form has got its own function, utility, place and time. And when that utility is over, nature dissolves the form. That's what he is saying. Okay? Utility of things, everything has got a limited utility, na? No, nobody's utility is infinite in the finite world. You have a bicycle today, you reject it when you have a motorcycle. You have a car, you reject the motorcycle. Utility is over. Utility of everything. Utility of your clothes, utility of your even effort. Sometimes you make an effort in one direction. So utility can always be limited. That's what
even metals can break down.
Yes,
they can rust.
That's right. And you reject, even aeroplanes you reject, and cars you reject. Utility is over. So when your function in the universe is over, your utility is over, you can't contribute anything more to the universe, nature dissolves you. So, for the individual life is a particular play of energy specialized to constitute, maintain, energize and finally dissolve, when its utility is over, one of the myriad forms which all serve, each in its own place, time and scope, the whole play of the universe. So, you must understand that even a worm has got a place, even a cockroach has got its own place and time and it's got its own utility. Sometimes one wonders why, but each one has got its own utility. Then,
the insects problem has bothered me for a long time, and I wrote to Mother about it. And I said, is there a consciously hostile force to life in the insects? I mean, we had them devouring our plants, our flowers, we have the mosquitoes, we have all kinds of biting insects. Mother said it's not like that. She said they do good and they do bad. And it's just like that. There are insects that pollinate flowers, that help produce fruits and vegetables.
That's exactly what Srinivas is saying. There's an interaction at every level, even from the minuscule, minutest level to the highest level.
Yes.
There's constantly interaction with the universe and the individual. Universe and individual. There's a constant interchange.
Mm-hmm.
So naturally there is utility for everything. And when we think of something which is harmful to us, it's harmful because we are limited. If we are unlimited, we will see its utility in its place. We will be able to see that if our consciousness is sufficiently high. A mosquito is devoured by lizards and other insects. So it is food for other creatures. And it also needs food, so it takes our blood. There is always a food chain. That's what he will tell you later on. There is a food chain, beginning from the plankton right up to the largest elephant or whatever you want. In fact, there is a very interesting quote from the Upanishad. We'll see that. So, the whole plane of the universe. The energy of life in the body has to support the attack of the energies external to it in the universe. There you are. So, the mosquito is an external force attacking you. Your body has to sustain that attack. The energy of life in the body has to support the attack of the energies external to it in the universe. It has to draw them in and feed upon them, and is itself being constantly devoured by them. So, we are devouring plants, and we are also being devoured by other creatures. So, at the animal level it is more apparent, but at the human level it is not that apparent, but cannibalism was there at one time. So
But you could also say that our parts are wearing out,
Yes.
being devoured.
Yes. Okay, so all matter, according to the Upanishad, is food, and that's why they use the word annam. Annam means food. Annam means actually rice or food. For matter, all matter is food. So, all matter, according to the Upanishad, is food, and this is the formula of the material world, that the eater eating is himself eaten. That's a food chain that he's talking about. You start from the lowest level, it goes on, goes on, goes on. What about human beings? So, there is a, from the Katha Upanishad, I have just quoted one, I am reading out to you what the Katha Upanishad is saying. It says, "He to whom the sages are as meat and heroes as food for its eating, and death is an ingredient of his banquet, how thus shall one know of him where he abideth?" This is the, so, even we are meat and food for the higher forces. So, the life organized in the body is constantly exposed to the possibility of being broken up by the attack of the life external to it, or its devouring capacity being insufficient or not properly served, or there being no right balance between the capacity of devouring and the capacity or necessity of providing food for the life outside. It is unable to protect itself and is devoured, or is unable to renew itself and therefore wasted away or broken. It has to go through the process of death for a new construction or renewal. This, what he's saying here, is very, very obvious at the animal level.
Yeah.
So, one animal can't protect itself, another one comes and eats it up. So if it is strong enough, it can challenge the external force. It will devour the external force, or the external force will devour it. There is a constant interchange.
And here it applies to us where he says, unable to renew itself
Yes.
and therefore wasted away.
Yes,
Or
that
broken.
also is there. And therefore wasted away or broken, unable to renew itself. It's interesting, there are certain lizards and all that, even if they lose a leg, they can renew the leg.
yes.
So, he is covering all ground, everything that is there in the universe, he is giving a... So, it can renew itself. Or nowadays we have learnt, if somebody in an accident loses his hand, okay, you put an artificial, partly you have renewed yourself. So all the possibilities are there. But if you can't, and nowadays we are doing organ transplants, renewal. Your heart is gone, instead of wasting away, you change the heart with somebody else. Whether it's a good thing or bad, I don't know. Mother has discussed this, I don't know.
I don't know that she has.
And
I think it's a good thing. And there's a beautiful film you should all see, Something the Lord Made, about the first black man who transplanted a heart, who actually did it rather than the man who took
I've seen the
credit.
movie.
You've seen the movie?
Yeah.
It's a beautiful movie.
he discovered how to,
Yes.
the problems of transplantation of heart, he solved the problem
Yes.
chemically. Yeah. But tell me, you have a character of your own, you have your own vibrations, and you are taking in some other vibrations that may be contrary to you and you are inserting it into your own nature. Doesn't that create a sort of disharmony within oneself?
It can, unless you stand back from it.
I don't know
and you
if it's a
don't
good
let
thing.
it pierce the aura, the envelope.
Of course, we all know that transplantation of organs and all that is a huge ethical problem, because the doctors are very keen to remove the organs from a half-living person.
Or a fully living person. Yes,
So
they've documented that.
they are very eager to declare the person brain dead. Brain dead. He is not actually, the body is not dead. And you harvest the organs.
And many organs, however many you can get.
Yes. Liver, heart, kidneys. So, this is life, what he is saying. We go to the next one.
Yes.
Not only so, but again in the language of the Upanishad, the life force is the food of the body, and the body the food of the life force. In other words, the life energy in us supplies the material by which the form is built up and constantly maintained and renewed, and is at the same time constantly using up the substantial form of itself, which it thus creates and keeps in existence. If the balance between these two operations is imperfect or is disturbed, or if the ordered play of the different currents of life force is thrown out of gear, then disease and decay intervene and commence the process of disintegration. And the very struggle for conscious mastery and even the growth of mind make the maintenance of the life more difficult. For there is an increasing demand of the life energy on the form, a demand which is in excess of the original system of supply and disturbs the original balance of supply and demand. And before a new balance can be established, many disorders are introduced inimical to the harmony and to the length of maintenance of the life. In addition, the attempt at mastery creates always a corresponding reaction in the environment which is full of forces that also desire fulfillment and are therefore intolerant of, revolt against, and attack the existence which seeks to master them. There too, a balance is disturbed. A more intense struggle is generated. However strong the mastering life, unless either it is unlimited or else succeeds in establishing a new harmony with its environment, it cannot always resist and triumph, but must one day be overcome and disintegrated. So, this is a very interesting para. Now tell me, I always ask my students the first sentence, what you understand by that? Tell me. Not only so, but again in the language of the Upanishad, the life force is the body, is the food of the body, and the body the food of the life force. Tell me, you understand what he's saying? The life force is the food of the body is clear. The life force that he's talking about is the vegetables or the meat that you eat. So you are taking it from inside, and the life force is food of the body. And the body is food of the life force. What do you understand? Which is the life force in you? All the action that you are doing, everything that you are acting is a life force. Can you do action without energy? You can't. And where is that energy coming from? The stored energy in the body. So, you are taking in life force from outside to support your body. It's like a battery. You are charging the battery and the battery is supporting your instrument. So, you are taking in food from outside, which is the life force, and then the body is the food for your life force, which is your vital. That's what he's saying. Interesting way of putting it, but that's exactly it.
The battery is an interesting aspect.
Yes.
Because the battery dies down also.
Yes, exactly. That's why it's the same thing. If without eating I go on doing action, the energy in my body is going to, just like the battery, exhaust itself. That's exactly what he's saying. Interesting. So he's putting it in a very interesting way that the life force is the food of the body. Meat or vegetables or cereals or whatever is the food of the body. And the body, the food of the life force. Now the life force in you means the energy that you are spending for your actions and your thoughts and your emotions. So you are using the body energy for your action. You see? Exactly like the battery. You have to charge the battery and the battery is allowing you to use its energy. In other words, the life energy in us both supplies the material by which the form is built up and constantly maintained and renewed, and is at the same time constantly using up the substantial form of itself, which it thus creates and keeps in existence. Now this is a very interesting thing. Sri Aurobindo fasted for 21 days, and he didn't eat at all. So the energy he is drawing from, but he is also using the energy of the body. So he became thin. But the energy he was drawing from the universe, so that he was sustaining. But because he was not replenishing his body with food, he became thin. And he says that the energy is not a problem, but how to maintain the body is a problem that maybe has to be solved one day without eating. In the evening talks he says that.
Yes.
So, okay, so renewed at the same time, constantly using up the substantial form of itself, which it thus creates. Life has created your body and it is using up the energy of the body. At the same time, constantly using up the substantial form of itself. Substantial form of itself, the body. It's the substantial form of the vital force, of which it thus creates and keeps in existence. If the balance between these two operations is imperfect or is disturbed, or if the ordered play of the different currents of life force is thrown out of gear, then disease and decay intervene and commence the process of disintegration. The amount of energy you are taking from outside and the amount of energy you are spending has to be balanced. If it is not balanced, it is very obvious. If I eat too much, I'll put on weight and I'll become unhealthy. If I spend too much energy without eating, then I will become thin and I will become weak. So disease comes in. There has to be a balance between the amount of energy you are taking in and the amount of energy you are spending. He's saying that in
rest and action.
Yes. Both. You have to. The energy taken in, the same amount has to be spent. And if that doesn't happen, then disease, decay intervene and commence the process of disintegration. And the very struggle for conscious mastery and even the growth of mind make the maintenance of the life more difficult.
That's an interesting sentence.
Yeah, growth of mind.
Yes.
Even your thought, when you are thinking, you are using up a lot of energy. I didn't know this. I thought that when you are thinking or you are using a mind power, it has no effect on the body, I thought. But somebody asked our chess champion, Vishwanathan Anand. He says that, oh yes, the body gets absolutely exhausted when you do a lot of thinking. 5 hours, 6 hours of chess play. And then he has to renew that energy in himself. So growth of mind, he is saying, growth of mind makes the maintenance of the life more difficult. For there is an increasing demand of the life energy on the form. Form is the body. A demand which is in excess of the original system of supply and disturbs the original balance of supply and demand. In the animal, it is automatically maintained. At the mind, at a human level, we have got an extra thing in the mind. So it draws also more energy. So it becomes complicated. That's what he's saying. So, and it disturbs the original balance of supply and demand, and before a new balance can be established, many disorders are introduced inimical to the harmony and to the length of maintenance of the life. So if that balance is disturbed, the length of your life also gets dislocated. People get very surprised in the ashram how people are living up to 90, 95, 100. We have had 7 or 8 centenarians. Because your life is very disciplined and very, very regular, and your eating habits are regular, your spending habits are regular, so the length of life is not disturbed.
But when balanced.
Balance is there. And if you don't do that, then even the length of the life, he's saying that very clearly, na? He's saying the length of maintenance of the life also is affected. How clear he is. Longevity is affected. In addition, the attempt at mastery creates always a corresponding reaction in the environment which is full of forces that also desire fulfillment and are therefore intolerant of, revolt against and attack the existence which seeks to master them. So, I want to look after myself, but somebody else also wants to look after himself. Our interests may not match, so there is constantly a struggle. That's what he's saying. The deer wants to survive. The lion wants to eat the deer, but the deer wants to run away. So there's always a clash between different forces.
But when he uses the word full of forces,
yes,
the environment which is full of forces.
That's right. And inimical.
They can be subtle forces also.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Subtle forces can be even more powerful than physical forces.
Yes.
And therefore intolerant of, revolt against and attack the existence which seeks to master them. There too a balance is disturbed, a more intense struggle is generated. Now, a more intense struggle, there you are. However strong the mastering life, unless either it is unlimited or else succeeds in establishing a new harmony with its environment, it cannot always resist and triumph, but must one day be overcome and disintegrated. It depends on how much energy, power you have. Depending on that, you can survive or you will be swallowed up and disintegrated by the other forces in the life. Okay? These paragraphs are rather short.
Yes.
So we read the next one. But apart from all these necessities, there is the one fundamental necessity of the nature and object of embodied life itself, which is to seek infinite experience on a finite basis. And since the form, the basis by its very organization, limits the possibility of experience, this can only be done by dissolving it and seeking new forms. It's a very interesting thing what he's saying, we'll discuss that.
Yeah.
That's why death is necessary. For the soul, having once limited itself by concentrating on the moment and the field, is driven to seek its infinity again by the principle of succession, by adding moment to moment and thus storing up a time experience which it calls its past. In that time, it moves through successive fields, successive experiences or lives, successive accumulations of knowledge, capacity, enjoyment, and all this it holds in subconscious or superconscious memory as its fund of past acquisition and time. To this process, change of form is essential, And for the soul involved in individual body, change of form means dissolution of the body in subjection to the law and compulsion of the all life in the material universe, to its law of supply of the material of form and demand on the material, to its principle of constant intershock and the struggle of the embodied life to exist in a world of mutual devouring. And this is the law of death. So, what he is explaining now, why death is necessary. When the soul enters and takes on a body-mind life, it has got a limited span of time and limited energy. It can experience only one thing at a time. In one life, how much experience can you have? Suppose you are born in India, you will have that experience, and one life you will carry those experiences. But you have no experience of Siberia or the Sahara Desert, so you must again change your form and go there. So he is saying that every life you have a limited amount of experience. But the soul is infinite. But it is stuck in the finite conditions of body-mind life. So the soul wanting infinite experience on the basis of a finite existence, it has to go on changing its conditions. And it is born, reborn there, reborn here, reborn here. Therefore, death is necessary because you want to change your circumstances. That's what he is saying. So death becomes necessary for the soul. The death not of the soul, but of the body-mind life. It's like changing your clothes. When the experience is something else, you need to change your outer circumstances also. I can't play football or cricket with my pajamas. That's a different experience, so I have to change my outer conditions. So, when I am born here in Sahara Desert maybe, I have some experience. And now I need to have an experience of the South Pole or North Pole. I have to change the conditions. How will you change the conditions? Dissolve the old form, get a new form. That's why death is necessary. So death is a process of life very, very beneficial to the soul. Because the soul is gathering experiences and collecting them. Look at the language, he is using very interesting words. But apart from all these necessities, there is one fundamental necessity of the nature and object of embodied life itself, which is to seek infinite experience on a finite basis. The soul is infinite and wants infinite experience, but the finite basis is the body-mind life. So it has to renew the body-mind life constantly. And that is death. Magnificent explanation.
Brilliant.
And since the form, the basis, by its very organization, limits the possibility of experience, this can only be done by dissolving it and seeking new forms. For the soul, having once limited itself by concentrating on the moment and the field, there you are. The moment is one life and the field is the place you are born in. So, is driven to seek its infinity again by the principle of succession. In one life you can't, so you have a series of lives. By succession you go on adding experience and experience to yourself. That's what he says.
What's so extraordinary to me is that he takes all sense of grief away.
Yes, that's right.
No sorrow, no suffering when one is lost. If you could see this.
You have to see it this way, yes. In fact, the soul that is leaving the body-mind life never suffers. It is the contrary. It's a beautiful experience. The soul goes out and immediately all the problems of body-mind life disappear, and they have done a lot of research on this now. And there are several. There's one chap called Raymond Moody. He has done a lot of research on this. And another is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. They have actually interviewed all these people, and they have found that invariably the person who dies temporarily and comes back reports that it's the most magnificent experience that you can have. A bodiless existence. You are in light, you are in a condition of love, you are in bliss All these experiences are there. So they're very interesting. But the grief is for one who is losing the person. The grief is here for one who is existing.
And that's emotional.
And that is the reason why one should not grieve for the person who has passed away.
Yes.
I'll tell you one interesting experience we had. There was a lady here who was looking after the boarding. Okay? She was a very fine Bengali woman a lady from Lucknow. She was a Bengali, but she used to speak perfect Hindi. She came here, she lost her husband, she lost her children. And before she came here, she went to a psychic and said, I want to talk to my daughter who has passed away. The psychic said, yes, I can make you the contact. And she told the story herself to us. So, when she called her daughter, the daughter told her, Ma, amake dekho na. Ma, my mother, Ma, don't call me. It disturbs my passage in the subtle world. It holds me back to the earthly conditions. So if you grieve, you are pulling me back. Whereas I want to go on to higher levels. So your grief is actually a problem to me. So don't call me. And when she came here to the ashram, she had 20 children under her. And she said, look at mother's grace. I lost my children, but she has given me 20 children now. She was very, very popular with all the kids. They were all little kids. And she was looking after them so well. Finally, she died of blood cancer. But she was a wonderful lady. And this she told us herself. So, no grief, as you said. So, when we grieve, we are actually doing harm to the soul that has left. So, now he has established the necessity of death. It is something that the soul needs. We think that the body-mind life is dead, but actually it's only a change of form. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, you wear out your worn out clothes, you throw out and put on new clothes. That's it. What death is really all about. Okay, so we go to the next para. So this is the law of death. The law of death is nothing but the necessity for the soul to have infinite experience, but it can't get infinite experience in a limited body, so it has to go on taking new bodies all the time and collect experience until it has gathered enough experience to be able to get the infinite, possess the infinite. And that's the evolution of the soul. So once the soul has gone through many, many lives, it has collected enough experience now, and finally it gets liberated and becomes infinite. Then rebirth is not necessary anymore.
Could it be thousands of lives?
Yes, lakhs.
Lakhs.
The tantrics speak of, because you are speaking of human lives. But what about the animal lives that you have had? You have had you are starting right from the lowest level. This is what many children ask. You are saying that we have many lives and we also have animal forms. Where does it all start? It starts from the atom. Because even the atom, there is a supermind in it, there is consciousness in it, there is life in it, there is ananda in it, everything is there. So you start from that level. There is the divine presence even in the atom. So it starts from there.
Any questions?
Difficult to conceive of.
Yes.
It's difficult to conceive of a soul individuality in an atom.
Soul, replace the word soul by divine presence. The divine presence is there even in the atom. And what is the divine presence? But the divine presence which has itself imprisoned itself in matter. And because it is divine, it wants to break out of that limited form. Therefore there is evolution.
Yes, this psychic being is only in the human form.
Yes. That divine presence, when it grows and struggles and struggles and struggles, a time comes when it becomes a psychic being. It is the soul that becomes a psychic being. The psychic being is conscious of itself, and its mission. But the soul is a divine presence in everything. So in the letters he explains that, yes.
If a psychic being has reached that stage where it is able to have a genuine interest in spiritual things,
Yes.
does it mean that he has already had a sufficient number of human lives?
Yes, of course. Because without sufficient number of human lives, how will the soul
Couldn't
develop?
get there.
The psyche can't develop, no? Yes, definitely. In fact, the tantrics, as I said, speak of lakhs of lives. And Shankaracharya, in one of his Viveka Chudamani, he says, Narajanma Durlabha. It's very difficult to have a human birth. So that means before that you have had so many different lives, animal forms, and then finally you have a human birth.
But what about emanations? Like who are emanations of the divine? So do they also have many lives, or can they be?
Yes.
Yeah.
Zero.
I didn't get your question, but if you have answered, that's okay, fine.
Please answer.
No, she's saying that when the divine emanates, so those emanations, do they also follow multiple lives?
The divine is, what do you mean by emanation? He is actually manifesting himself. And emanation is, you have to use the word correctly. An emanation, as far as mother is there, if a force goes out of her, it's her emanation. But when the divine is manifesting himself, it may be an emanation in the beginning, but it becomes clogged and imprisoned in matter. He's purposely playing that game. He handcuffs himself, blindfolds himself, and says, this is an adventure I'm going to play with myself. I'm going to go into the worst possible conditions and I will get back to where I was. So this is the evolution of... And he's doing this through each one separately. He's not satisfied with only one experience. He wants to do this through million ways.
And Mother says, you have all been with me many times before.
Those who have been called. Yeah.
Yes.
Those who have been called.
Many times.
She has identified many of the, even children.
Yes.
Even when we were kids, she has told about one or two kids. She said, one girl, she said, you were a shepherdess in France. One of the girls, she's still living. So like that, there are so many. Yeah, you have all been, you're not conscious of it, but you have all been called here. Because at some time, you have been promised that you will be here at the time of the realization. He says that. And all those who are followers of Mother and Sri Aurobindo are candidates, definitely, for the superior race that's going to come. That fantastic passage in Savitri?
Yes, yes.
Remember? I saw them.
Cross the borders.
Yeah. The amber stairs of...
Can come crowding down the amber stairs of birth.
Yes.
Forerunners of a divine multitude.
That's right.
Into the little human sphere of life they came.
So...
Do you think if the soul has chosen to be here, come here and stay here with Mother, this thing of passing away and being born in Siberia or whatever would not be necessary? I mean, do you get what I mean?
Well, if you read the stories of people who are coming to Auroville, particularly from Colombia, from here, from there, they have some experience and something tells them, go to Pondicherry, do this, or they have a vision of Mother. So they are all called. There's no doubt about it. If you read all these stories of Aurovillians, how they come here, the circumstances are fantastic. They have some implication, or somebody, somehow or other they are made to come to Pondicherry or India, and in India they come here finally. They are all called. Similarly, this is one particular group, Mothers and Sri Aurobindo's group. There are other groups also like that. Suppose around Ramakrishna, there was another group that collected. Like that, there is different groups also.
These are families of souls.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
That's right. In fact, Ramakrishna found all his disciples, he said, "You people were with me in other lives." He said that. This then is the necessity and justification of death, not as a denial of life, but as a process of life. Death is necessary because eternal change of form is the sole immortality to which the finite living substance can aspire, and eternal change of experience the sole infinity to which the finite mind involved in living body can attain. This change of form cannot be allowed to remain merely a constant renewal of the same form type, such as constitutes our bodily life between birth and death. For unless the form type is changed and the experiencing mind is thrown into new forms in new circumstances of time, place and environment, the necessary variation of experience which the very nature of existence in time and space demands cannot be effectuated. He's saying exactly what we discussed. Different times, different countries, and we got different things. And it is only the process of death, and it is only the process of death by dissolution and by the devouring of life by life. It is only the absence of freedom, the compulsion, the struggle, the pain, the subjection to something that appears to be not self, which makes this necessary and salutary change appear terrible and undesirable to our mortal mentality. It is the sense of being devoured, broken up, destroyed or forced away which is the sting of death, and which even the belief in personal survival of death cannot wholly abrogate.
Whoa.
Powerful language, and he's saying how the sting of death affects you because you are ignorant and you don't realize. So, what we discussed just now, he is again saying the same thing, that the soul goes on taking in different time, place, country and all that, goes on taking experience and grows in consciousness. Not only consciousness but power and ananda, everything. Okay?
But it is only the absence of freedom,
Yeah.
the compulsion, the struggle, the pain, the subjection to something that appears to be not self.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
In fact, the death when it occurs, it's a very terrible experience. Those who have had the experience, you know. You will never see that person again. Mm-hmm. That inevitability, that something which cuts you off, that hits you like hell.
Yes.
There was one lady, I remember, when she lost her son, we were actually having lunch and she suddenly broke down because her son had passed away. He was an elderly son, 60, 70 years old. And she said, even if I look in every corner of the world, I will not see him ever again. So this is what she felt with such poignancy. This is what is using the word, the sting of death. This is what actually hits you. The inevitability of it. But if you are in a condition of a higher condition, you will realize. As Ramakrishna said, Shuddhu to ei ghar theke oi ghar. Only from one room to the other room. Niruddha's, that when Sri Aurobindo passed away, he wrote a book, The Passing of Sri Aurobindo, and the subtitle was, I am here, I am here. That booklet is there. You have, I don't know if it's in print still.
Yes, I have it.
You have the book?
It is there in the book, To Thee Our Infinite Gratitude.
It's
that
there
is
with,
the...
it's
yeah.
there with some other articles also. I'm Amal's article.
Yes, Amar Rajkar also is there.
Yes.
The Passing of Sri Aurobindo and its inner significance.
Yes.
But Niruddha's book was, the subtitle was, I am here, I am here.
Now I have a question for you. It is said at the time of death that the various parts of the being are thrown away.
Yes.
But it is also said that one has to go through certain vital worlds which are very dangerous.
Yes.
It's not all sweetness and light.
Yeah, it depends on what you have undergone in life. So, first of all, your body dissolves. Then you are left only with your vital and your mind and your soul. Then the vital has to dissolve next. If you have had a normal, healthy life, the vital dissolves. But
If one is a killer,
yes, that means you have had a very violent life and a very disturbed life. The vital has taken a strong form. It doesn't dissolve very easily. And that's the phenomena of ghosts, phantoms. That's what happens. So this often the vital being doesn't realize that it doesn't have a body, and it tries to, even without a body, it tries to realize its desires which it could not fulfill in life. So this is that dangerous passage that you are talking about. But even in yoga, when you are going into the inner worlds, you have to cross the vital world. And when you cross that vital world, all sorts of falsities and wrong suggestions and wrong things can come. Sri Aurobindo calls it the valley of the false glimmer.
yes.
It's the
in
valley of the
solitary.
false glimmer.
Yes.
And you can get stuck there. I'll give you one instance, then you will see. There used to be a gentleman here, he has passed away now, I can take his name also. His name was Orunda. He was a Bengali man and he used to be our lifeguard. Okay? And he had entered into the vital world and he was having some, according to him, wonderful experiences. Those who have gone into the vital world, the experiences can be very beautiful. Even with drugs, when you take, you go into the vital world only. But if you are lucky, you can have beautiful experiences. But if you are unlucky, you will have very bad experience, nightmares usually there. So this man, he was experiencing all these things and he thought it's a wonderful thing. He wrote to mother. And mother stopped the experiences. This man revolted. He says, mother has taken away my experiences. He doesn't know that mother is protecting him. His name was Orun Teko. He used to be a bald man, so we used to call him Orun Teko. Teko means Takmatha. So, but this was his complaint, that mother has taken away my experiences.
Because they were so powerful and
Not only
beautiful.
powerful, it would have misguided him.
But he loved them because they
Yes,
were so
because he thought
special.
he's getting power also.
Yes, yes.
He's getting power. Look at Hitler, all the power that he was getting from wrong forces.
But did he eventually understand that it was for his own?
I don't know. This much I know. About whether he evolved enough to understand that mother had saved him, I don't know. But I know this much. He used to complain. And there was so many other cases. When they go there, they get stuck in the valley of the false glimmer. Sri Aurobindo also calls it the intermediate zone. This is not after death. This is when you are doing yoga and you have to enter. First you have to get rid of your identification with the body, then you have to get rid of your identification with the vital, then you have to go deeper inside and then only you can contact your psychic being or even the mental Purusha. So you have to go through all these passages. There was one gentleman here, his name was Tirupati. He was from Andhra. I can speak of it because it is all in the letters are there. He also entered into the vital world and he was getting tremendous energy. He wrote to Sri Aurobindo, I don't need to eat, I don't need to sleep. Sri Aurobindo said, you are making a big mistake. Continue to eat normally and sleep normally.
Yes.
He didn't listen.
I remember that, yeah.
And he lost his mind, he had to be taken away back again.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that passage is there through the vital being, that can be very dangerous. But if you are a normal person, your body gets dissolved, your vital gets dissolved, your mind also gets dissolved, and then the psychic being goes to the psychic world, ruminates, absorbs, assimilates what experiences it has had and takes birth again. This is the process normally. But sometimes the mind is very developed, the mind also won't dissolve. It will continue to remain.
And have you read or heard or have an idea of how long that process is before
Yes.
the next birth?
That's right. There is a generally it is said 2.5 to 3 years.
That's all.
But it's not a rule. Sri Aurobindo says very clearly there are no rules in this. But 2 to 3 years is normal. But sometimes in not very developed beings, immediately. And then they remember their past lives. There have been many cases like that in Lebanon, in Syria, in India, even in America. There was one case. And that case was very interesting. On National Geographic, I saw one. A 5-year-old boy looking at the TV, identifying each plane and saying, this plane is this plane is that. I think I told you about that once. And finally he said, that is the plane in which I crashed. And then they found out, the parents got interested, they found out that he had really crashed in the Second World War in one of the planes. And he knew the name of the plane also.
Thank you, Ranga.